The scorching summer sun beat down on the Dakota Territory in the summer of 1878, turning the rolling grasslands into a sea of golden waves. Samuel Blackwood wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed his property from the porch of his modest ranch house. At 45, his weathered face told the story of a man who had seen his share of hardship and triumph in the unforgiving West. The ranch had been his life's work. 15 years of back-breaking labor, carefully cultivated relationships with neighboring settlers, and an uneasy peace with the Lakota tribes whose ancestral lands surrounded his cattle operation. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and the lines around his eyes deepened as he squinted toward the distant hills where dust signaled approaching riders. "Riders coming, Mr. Blackwood," called Jacob, his foreman, a former Union soldier who had followed Samuel west after the war. "Looks like Lakota, about 20 of them." Samuel nodded, reaching instinctively for the Colt revolver at his hip, a habit formed through years on the frontier where danger could materialize with little warning. Unlike many of the newer settlers, Samuel had established a reputation for fair dealings with the native tribes, learning enough of their language to conduct basic trade and respecting the boundaries they had negotiated. He had survived the bloody Dakota War and the subsequent tensions not through force of arms, but through a pragmatic respect that recognized their shared dependence on the land. The approaching party flew no white flag, but neither did they approach with the speed and formation of a war party. Samuel stepped down from the porch, motioning for his ranch hands to continue their work but remain vigilant. The riders approached at an unhurried pace, their horses kicking up dust that caught the afternoon light like floating gold. At their head rode Chief Grey Wolf, a Lakota leader Samuel had met during treaty negotiations in Fort Laramie 3 years prior. The chief's face was impassive, painted with red and black stripes that indicated some ceremonial purpose to this visit. Behind him rode warriors in full regalia, their expressions equally unreadable, spears and rifles visible but not brandished threateningly. The unusual formality of their appearance sent a ripple of unease down Samuel's spine. This was no ordinary trading visit or boundary discussion. Samuel straightened his posture and walked forward to meet them, careful to maintain the dignity expected in such encounters. Grey Wolf raised his hand in greeting as he brought his paint horse to a stop 10 yards from Samuel. "Chief Grey Wolf," Samuel said in carefully practiced Lakota, then switched to English, which he knew the chief understood reasonably well. "I welcome you to my ranch. What brings you and your warriors here today?" The chief dismounted with the fluid grace of a lifelong horseman, his ornate headdress of eagle feathers catching the breeze. For a long moment, he simply studied Samuel's face, as if searching for something in the rancher's weathered features. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the distant lowing of cattle. Samuel maintained eye contact, knowing that in Lakota culture, looking away could be interpreted as a sign of dishonesty or weakness. Around them, his ranch hands had paused in their work, hands never straying far from their weapons, while the Lakota warriors remained mounted, their collective gaze fixed on the exchange between the two leaders. "Blackwood," Grey Wolf finally spoke, his voice deep and measured, "the spirits have spoken to our medicine man. A great drought comes next season. Many will die, your cattle, our people, the settlers, unless balance is restored." Samuel felt a familiar tension creep into his shoulders. He had great respect for Lakota spiritual beliefs, but experience had taught him that such pronouncements often preceded difficult negotiations. He'd heard similar predictions from both natives and settlers alike. The frontier was rife with prophets and doomsayers whose predictions varied as widely as the weather itself. Still, he nodded respectfully, waiting for the chief to continue. Grey Wolf's weathered face remained solemn as he gestured toward the distant hills. 3 nights ago, as the moon was full, Thunderbeing came to White Feather in a vision. He showed the way to save both our peoples. Grey Wolf motioned. Grey Wolf. And from the group of warriors, a much older man dismounted. White Feather, the tribe's respected medicine man, his face deeply lined with age and wisdom, his clothing adorned with symbols of spiritual significance unfamiliar to Samuel. The old man approached slowly, leaning on a staff topped with a buffalo skull, feathers and beads dangling from its length. His eyes, though clouded with age, held Samuel's with surprising intensity. The vision was clear, White Feather said in Lakota, with Grey Wolf translating. The rancher called Blackwood must join with our tribe through sacred bonds. You must take Princess Tall Feather as your wife before the next moon. She is blessed by the spirits, born in the year of the great star shower, destined to bring harmony between our peoples. Samuel blinked, certain he had misunderstood. Marriage alliances were not uncommon on the frontier. Many traders and trappers had taken native wives to cement trade relationships or gain access to tribal territories. But Samuel was the established rancher with connections throughout the territory, not some young trapper seeking advantage. At 45, he had long ago resigned himself to bachelorhood after losing his fiancée to typhoid back in Pennsylvania before the war. He cleared his throat, searching for a diplomatic response. I am honored by this proposal, he began carefully, but surely there are other ways we might strengthen the bonds between our peoples. Perhaps a trade agreement or... Grey Wolf raised his hand, cutting off Samuel's words. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. This is not a trade, the chief said flatly. This is the way shown by the spirits to save both our peoples. Princess Tall Feather is the daughter of my sister, born when the stars fell from the sky. She stands taller than any woman of our tribe, marked by the spirits. The vision was clear. The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. If you refuse, the drought will come. Your cattle will die. Your ranch will burn. This is not a threat from us, but a warning of what the spirits have shown. Samuel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach despite the summer heat. He'd built this ranch from nothing, turning a wild stretch of prairie into a productive cattle operation through years of relentless work. The thought of losing it all sent a surge of anger through him, quickly tempered by pragmatism. Angering the Lakota would be disastrous, even with his ranch hands. They were outnumbered by the warriors present, not to mention the hundreds more in Grey Wolf's band. I would like to meet this woman before making such a decision, Samuel said carefully, falling back on the frontier, courtesy that had served him well in delicate negotiations. Grey Wolf and White Feather exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. After a moment, the chief nodded and gestured toward the group of mounted warriors. They parted, revealing a figure that had been hidden from Samuel's view. A woman rode forward on a dappled mare, her back straight and proud. As she approached, Samuel's eyes widened involuntarily. Princess Tall Feather was aptly named. She towered above the other Lakota, her height remarkable even from horseback. Her black hair hung in 2 long braids adorned with feathers and beads. Her deerskin dress elaborately decorated with porcupine quill work. Her features were striking, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes that held his with unflinching directness. She dismounted without assistance, and standing at her full height, she was nearly as tall as Samuel himself, who stood over 6 feet, a giant by the standards of both their peoples. No wonder the Lakota considered her marked by the spirits. Such unusual height would be seen as a sign in most cultures. She approached with dignity, her movements fluid and graceful despite her unusual stature. Samuel found himself straightening instinctively, oddly conscious of his dusty work clothes and unshaven face. "This is Princess Tall Feather," Grey Wolf said, a note of pride evident in his voice. "She has agreed to this union to save our peoples." The woman inclined her head slightly in greeting, but remained silent, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts about this arranged marriage. Samuel noted that despite her imposing height, she carried herself with a natural elegance, and her eyes held intelligence, and perhaps, though it was difficult to be certain, a hint of the same reluctance he felt. "Princess?" Samuel acknowledged with a respectful nod, uncertain of the proper protocol. He turned back to Grey Wolf, mind racing to find a diplomatic path forward. "This is unexpected. I must have time to consider such an important decision." The chief's expression darkened. "There is no time. The drought comes. You have until the sun sets tomorrow, then we return for your answer." White Feather stepped forward, his ancient eyes boring into Samuel's. "When you sleep tonight, ask your own spirits for guidance. They will tell you the same as ours." With that cryptic statement, the old medicine man turned and made his way back to his horse with surprising agility for one of his years. Princess Tallfeather lingered a moment longer, her eyes meeting Samuel's once more. Something passed between them, not quite understanding, but perhaps recognition of their shared predicament. Then she too turned away, mounting her horse with practiced ease despite her unusual height. Grey Wolf delivered his parting words with unmistakable finality. "Tomorrow at sunset, Blackwood, marry the giant woman, or we burn your ranch. This is the way of the spirits." With that, he mounted his horse, and the entire party wheeled around as one, riding back toward the distant hills. Samuel stood motionless, watching them disappear into the shimmering heat waves rising from the prairie. Jacob approached cautiously from behind. "What in God's name was that about?" "Mr. Blackwood?" Samuel continued staring at the horizon, the chief's ultimatum ringing in his ears. "It seems," he replied slowly, "that I've been offered a choice that's no choice at all. Marriage or destruction." He turned to face his foreman, the reality of his situation settling over him like a heavy blanket. "Gather the men, Jacob. We need to talk." The ranch hands gathered in the main house as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the weathered floorboards. Samuel stood before them, 12 men who had cast their lot with him in this remote corner of the Dakota Territory. Some, like Jacob, had been with him since the beginning. Others were drifters who had found steady work and fair treatment on the Blackwood Ranch. All of them were armed, as was the custom on the frontier, and all watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "I expect you all saw our visitors today," Samuel began, pouring himself a measure of whiskey from a bottle kept for special occasions. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it thoughtfully in the glass. "Chief Grey Wolf and his medicine man have delivered an ultimatum. I'm to marry the chief's niece, a woman they call Princess Tallfeather, or they claim disaster will befall us all, drought, death of our cattle, and the burning of the ranch." "That's plumb crazy talk, Mr. Blackwood," said Morgan, a grizzled cowhand who had ridden with the Texas Rangers before drifting north. "You can't be considering it. We've got enough ammunition and supplies to hold off an attack until word can reach the cavalry at Fort Abraham." Several men nodded in agreement, hands moving unconsciously to touch pistols or rifle stocks. Samuel raised a hand for silence. "I've lived on this frontier long enough to know that fighting the Lakota would be a losing proposition. Even if we survived an initial attack, they would pick us off one by one, run off our cattle, poison our wells, and I'll not have the blood of my men on my conscience." He took a sip of whiskey, feeling the burn travel down his throat. Besides, Grey Wolf has been a man of his word in the past. If he claims this vision of drought, he believes it, whether we do or not. "So you're actually considering this marriage?" Jacob asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "To a woman you've barely met, an Indian princess?" Samuel set his glass down with a sharp click against the wooden table. "I'm considering all options to ensure the survival of this ranch and everyone on it." His voice hardened slightly. "Judge Wilson in Deadwood owes me a favor. Tomorrow morning, Jacob, you'll ride to town with a message. Tell him the situation and ask what legal standing such a marriage would have in the territory. Ask about property rights, should anything happen to me." Jacob nodded. though his expression remained troubled. "And what of the lady herself?" he asked quietly. "She didn't seem any more pleased about this arrangement than you." Samuel rubbed his temples, where a headache was beginning to form. The truth was, Princess Tallfeather's reaction, or lack thereof, had been troubling him since the Lakota had departed. "That's another matter entirely," Samuel admitted. "I've no desire to force a woman into marriage, Indian or otherwise. When they return tomorrow, I'll speak with her alone if possible. If she's being coerced—" He didn't finish the thought, unsure himself what options existed if both he and the princess were unwilling pawns in some larger game. Morgan spat into the brass spittoon near the fireplace. "You ask me. It's just a ploy to get control of your water rights and grazing land. Indians been using that trick since forever. Marry their women into settler families. Then before you know it, the whole tribe's camped in your front yard." Several men murmured in agreement. Samuel frowned, the casual prejudice grating on him despite its commonality on the frontier. "That may be," he acknowledged, "but Chief Grey Wolf has never struck me as deceitful. Proud, stubborn, and dangerous when crossed, certainly, but not dishonest." "What if it ain't Grey Wolf's idea at all?" suggested Williams, a younger ranch hand who rarely spoke up. "What if it's that medicine man pulling the strings? Them shamans hold powerful sway." It was a perspective Samuel hadn't considered. White Feather had seemed particularly insistent about the spiritual necessity of the union. "Possible," Samuel allowed. "In any case, gentlemen, double the night watch until further notice. No hostile actions toward any Lakota, but stay alert." As the men filed out to their various duties, Jacob lingered behind. "You've built something good here, Mr. Blackwood," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, the men and I will stand by you." Samuel nodded gratefully, though privately he wondered if his foreman would be so supportive if he knew the direction his thoughts were taking. Because as the evening shadows lengthened across the Dakota prairie, Samuel Blackwood was beginning to consider the unthinkable, that perhaps this bizarre marriage proposal was his best option after all. Night fell over the Blackwood Ranch, bringing with it a chorus of prairie sounds. Coyotes calling in the distance, the soft lowing of cattle in their pens, the creak of windmill blades turning in the gentle evening breeze. Samuel sat alone on his porch, nursing a final glass of whiskey as he contemplated the stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast, dark sky. The same stars, he mused, that the Lakota believed had marked Princess Tallfeather at birth. A shooting star traced a brief, brilliant path across the heavens, as if summoned by his thoughts. Samuel had never been a particularly religious man. He attended the occasional service when a traveling preacher passed through, more out of social obligation than spiritual need. But there was something about the western sky at night that made a man feel small and contemplative, forced to consider powers greater than himself. White Feather's parting words echoed in his mind. "Ask your own spirits for guidance." Samuel chuckled humorlessly into the darkness. His spirits had been notably silent on matters of importance throughout his life. They hadn't warned him when Elizabeth fell ill back in Pennsylvania, leaving him to mourn a future that would never come. They hadn't guided him through the horrors of Antietam, where he'd survived, while so many others fell. And they certainly weren't offering any clear direction now, as he faced losing everything he'd built, or binding himself to a stranger from a world as different from his own as the moon from the sun. Yet as the night deepened and his glass emptied, Samuel found his thoughts returning again and again to Princess Tallfeather. There had been something in her eyes, a quiet strength, perhaps even a resignation similar to his own. She was clearly no ordinary woman, and not just because of her remarkable height. Morning came with the harsh brilliance typical of summer on the high plains. Samuel rose before dawn. Having slept poorly despite his exhaustion, Jacob departed for Deadwood with first light, carrying messages for Judge Wilson and the territorial governor, though Samuel held little hope that official intervention would arrive in time to matter. The ranch resumed its normal rhythms, cattle being moved to fresh pasture, Fences mended, supplies inventoried, but an undercurrent of tension ran through every interaction. By midday, Samuel had made his decision, though he kept it to himself, wanting to speak with Princess Tallfeather before finalizing his course of action. He spent the afternoon in unusually meticulous personal preparations, bathing in the creek that ran through his property, trimming his beard and donning the suit he kept for rare trips to town. If he was to face this crisis, he would do so with dignity. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber when the lookout called out the approach of riders. Samuel stood on his porch, watching as a much larger contingent of Lakota warriors appeared on the horizon. At least 50 this time, their presence sending a clear message about the seriousness of Grey Wolf's ultimatum. The ranch hands positioned themselves strategically around the property, rifles within easy reach but not openly displayed. Samuel had given strict instructions to avoid provocations at all costs. The approaching party slowed as they neared the ranch house, forming a loose semicircle. Grey Wolf rode at the center, flanked by Whitefeather and Princess Tallfeather. The chief raised his hand in greeting, his face as impassive as it had been the previous day. "Blackwood," he called out, "the sun sets. What is your answer?" Samuel descended the porch steps with deliberate calm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He had faced danger before, hostile natives, armed rustlers, the fury of prairie storms, but never a moment that would so definitively alter the course of his life. "Before I give my answer," Samuel replied, projecting his voice to carry across the distance between them, "I wish to speak with Princess Tallfeather. Alone." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Grey Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded once. "She may speak with you, but I will be watching." Princess Tallfeather dismounted with fluid grace and approached Samuel. Up close, her height was even more remarkable. She stood eye to eye with him, something he had rarely experienced with any woman. She wore the same elaborate dress as before, but now her face was painted with ceremonial markings, red lines across her cheekbones and a single blue stripe down the center of her forehead. Samuel gestured toward a spot near the corral, far enough from both the Lakota warriors and his own men to offer some privacy, yet still in full view to prevent misunderstandings. As they walked, he noted that she moved with unexpected grace for someone of her stature. When they reached the fence, he turned to face her, suddenly uncertain how to begin this most unusual conversation. "Do you speak English?" he asked finally. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but she nodded. "I was taught by the missionaries at the agency school," she replied, her voice deeper than most women's but pleasant, her English accented but clear. "Before they were sent away." The simple statement hinted at the complex history between their peoples, the cycle of treaties made and broken, promises offered and withdrawn. Samuel nodded, relieved at least that they could communicate directly. "I must ask you plainly," he said, lowering his voice further. "Is this marriage your choice, or are you being forced into it as I am?" Something flickered across her features. Surprise, perhaps, that he would consider her wishes at all. She glanced briefly toward her uncle before returning her gaze to Samuel's face. "The visions came to Whitefeather, not to me," she said carefully. "But I've always known my path would be different. The spirits marked me at birth." She gestured to her unusual height. "I have never fit among my own people. The children called me Tree Woman when I was young. The warriors find me unsettling." A hint of bitterness colored these last words. "Grey Wolf has always protected me, but there is no place for one like me. No Lakota man would take me as wife." She straightened her already impressive posture. "If this marriage will save my people from hunger, then it is my duty." Not exactly a ringing endorsement of their potential union, Samuel thought wryly, but at least she wasn't being dragged to the altar against her will. "And what happens after?" he pressed. "Will your people expect you to betray me? To open my ranch to them? To steal my cattle or water?" Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. "I am Lakota. We do not break our word once given. If I become your wife in the eyes of both our peoples, I will be loyal until death." The vehemence of her response startled him. There was pride there, and perhaps a touch of defensiveness. She had clearly faced suspicion before. Samuel studied her face, finding no deception in her direct gaze. "Then I have one last question," he said quietly. "If I agree to this marriage, what will you expect of me? As a husband?" A faint flush colored her cheeks, visible even beneath the ceremonial paint. "I will keep your home and learn your ways," she replied, her voice steady despite her evident discomfort with the subject. "I will bring honor to both our peoples through this union. As for the duties of a wife, I understand what is required." She paused, then added with quiet dignity, "I ask only for respect, Blackwood. I do not expect love." Samuel felt an unexpected pang at her words. This proud, unusual woman deserved better than a marriage of political convenience to a weathered rancher 15 years her senior. Yet here they stood, pawns in a game larger than themselves. "My name is Samuel," he said finally. "If we are to be married, you should use it." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Samuel," she repeated, the name sounding exotic in her accented English. "And you may call me Wanblee. It is my true name. Tall Feather is what the white traders call me." Samuel nodded, oddly touched by this small intimacy. The exchange of their true names, a first step toward whatever their relationship might become. "Wanblee," he said, testing the unfamiliar syllables. She nodded, seemingly pleased with his pronunciation. Taking a deep breath, Samuel made his decision final. "Very well. Tell Chief Grey Wolf I accept the marriage on one condition, that a proper treaty be drawn up between us, guaranteeing the safety of my ranch and men and establishing clear boundaries for both our peoples." Wanblee studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head in acknowledgement. "I will tell him. He will agree. He wishes for peace between our peoples as much as you do." As they walked back toward the waiting groups, Samuel felt a curious mixture of resignation and relief. He had made his choice. Now he could only hope it was the right one. The news of Samuel's decision spread quickly among both groups. His ranch hands received it with mixed reactions: concern, disbelief, and, in a few cases, thinly veiled disapproval. Jacob, who had returned from Deadwood just as the Lakota arrived, pulled Samuel aside with barely contained agitation. "Judge Wilson says such a marriage would be recognized in the territory," he reported in a low voice, "but he strongly advises against it. Says it could affect your standing with other ranchers, maybe even your water rights." Samuel nodded, having expected as much. The frontier might be more flexible than Eastern society in many ways, but a white rancher marrying a Lakota woman, especially one as unusual as Wanblee, would raise eyebrows at best, provoke hostility at worst. "The judge's concerns are noted," Samuel replied firmly, "but my decision stands. Better an unusual marriage than a burned ranch and dead men." Meanwhile, Grey Wolf and White Feather conducted what appeared to be a brief ceremony among the Lakota warriors. With Wanblee at the center, Samuel could only guess at its significance, perhaps a blessing or a formal release from her tribal obligations. When it concluded, Grey Wolf approached Samuel with newfound respect in his bearing. "We will make the treaty as you ask," the chief said. "Tonight we prepare. Tomorrow at midday, when the sun is highest, the wedding will take place here. Many more of our people will come to witness." That was an understatement. By the following morning, the hills surrounding the Blackwood Ranch were dotted with Lakota teepees, at least 100 of them, suggesting the presence of several hundred tribal members. The sight sent a ripple of alarm through the ranch hands until Samuel assured them that this massive gathering was ceremonial, not hostile. Still, he noticed that none of his men strayed far from their weapons throughout the morning. Judge Wilson arrived from Deadwood shortly before noon, looking distinctly uncomfortable about the proceedings, but unwilling to refuse Samuel's request to officiate. "This is highly irregular, Blackwood," he muttered as they waited for the ceremony to begin. "I'm only doing this because you saved my son during that blizzard 3 winters back." Samuel nodded gratefully. "I appreciate it, Judge. Better to have this properly documented than to leave any legal questions hanging." The judge harumphed, adjusting his spectacles nervously as he eyed the gathering Lakota. By Samuel's estimate, nearly 500 tribal members had assembled on his property. Men, women and children in their finest regalia, creating a sea of color against the golden prairie backdrop. Never in the 15 years since establishing his ranch had Samuel seen so many native people in one place. The sight was both intimidating and oddly moving. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as Whitefeather emerged from a specially constructed ceremonial teepee, his ancient face painted with intricate designs, his gnarled hands clutching a sacred pipe. Behind him came Grey Wolf, resplendent in a full headdress and ceremonial buckskins, adorned with hundreds of beads and porcupine quills. And then, at last, Wanblee appeared. Samuel felt his breath catch despite himself. She was transformed from the woman he had met 2 days earlier. Her black hair hung loose down her back, adorned with eagle feathers and silver ornaments that caught the sunlight. Her dress, clearly made for this occasion, was a masterpiece of Lakota craftsmanship, white deerskin embroidered with thousands of colored beads in geometric patterns, with long fringe that swayed hypnotically as she moved. Around her neck hung multiple strands of blue and white beads, and her face was painted with red and yellow designs that emphasized her high cheekbones and direct gaze. As Wanblee approached the center of the gathering where Samuel stood with Judge Wilson, the assembled Lakota began a low chant, punctuated by the rhythmic beating of drums. The sound resonated through the clear summer air, primal and profound. Samuel, dressed in his best suit with a fresh haircut and trimmed beard, felt distinctly underdressed beside his bride's splendor. Yet as she took her place beside him, her eyes met his with the same direct gaze as before, 2 people thrown together by circumstance, making the best of an impossible situation. Whitefeather began the ceremony in Lakota, his reedy voice carrying surprising power as he called upon the spirits to bless the union. Grey Wolf translated portions for Samuel's benefit, though much of the ritual remained mysterious to him. The sacred pipe was passed, first to Whitefeather, then Grey Wolf, then to Samuel, who had hurriedly been instructed in the proper way to partake, and finally to Wanblee. Throughout the Lakota ceremony, Samuel was struck by the respect, even reverence, with which the tribal members treated Wanblee. Despite her earlier comments about never fitting in, it was clear that her people regarded her with awe rather than ridicule. Each time Whitefeather referred to her, he used a title that the assembled warriors repeated in unison, their voices blending into a powerful chorus. Later, Samuel would learn that they were calling her Princess of the Sky People, a reference to the shooting stars that had marked her birth. When the Lakota portion of the ceremony concluded, Judge Wilson stepped forward nervously to conduct the legal aspects of the marriage. His usual confident courtroom demeanor was notably absent as he fumbled with the territorial marriage document, painfully aware of hundreds of Lakota eyes upon him. "Do you, Samuel James Blackwood, take this woman, He glanced at the document where Samuel had written Wanblee's full name, "Wanblee Luta Win, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Until death do you part?" Samuel met Wanblee's steady gaze. "I do," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Judge Wilson turned to Wanblee. "And do you, Wanblee Luta Win, take this man, Samuel James Blackwood, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" He continued with the traditional vows. Speaking slowly to ensure she understood, Wanblee listened intently, her expression solemn. When the judge finished, she replied in clear English, "I do take this man as husband, until death." The simple dignity of her response struck Samuel powerfully. "By the authority vested in me by the Dakota Territory," Judge Wilson concluded with evident relief, "I now pronounce you man and wife." He coughed awkwardly. "You may, kiss the bride." Samuel hesitated, uncertain how such a gesture would be received by either Wanblee or the watching Lakota. But she solved the dilemma by leaning forward slightly, offering her cheek rather than her lips. Samuel placed a chaste kiss there, inhaling the unfamiliar scent of sage and sweetgrass that clung to her hair. As they turned to face the assembled gathering, a great cry went up from the Lakota, not the war whoop that featured in so many frontier nightmares, but a sound of celebration and approval. Whitefeather raised his hands toward the sky, where thunderclouds had begun to gather on the distant horizon, despite the clear blue overhead. "The spirits are pleased," he proclaimed in Lakota, with Grey Wolf translating. "The rain will come, the drought is broken." As if on cue, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the prairie. The Lakota's celebration intensified, with drumming and singing breaking out among various groups. Several warriors approached Samuel, clasping his arm in a gesture of respect he recognized from previous encounters with the tribe. To his surprise, they addressed him as brother through Grey Wolf's translation. Even more surprising was the way they treated Wanblee. Warriors and elders alike approached her with deep bows, some touching their foreheads to the ground before her. "What are they calling you?" Samuel asked quietly, as another group of Lakota women approached with similar displays of reverence. "They call me Princess," she replied, a hint of embarrassment in her voice. "It is because of the star signs at my birth. They believe I am connected to the Sky People, the ancestors who watch from above." The celebration continued throughout the afternoon and into the evening. A great feast had been prepared. Lakota women had brought traditional foods, while Samuel had contributed 3 of his cattle to be roasted over massive fire pits. The two peoples, ranch hands and tribal members, maintained a cautious distance at first, but as the hours passed, the barriers began to relax slightly. Samuel observed Jacob deep in conversation with one of Grey Wolf's sub-chiefs, comparing hunting techniques through a mixture of broken English, sign language, and shared tobacco. Even Judge Wilson, after signing and officiating the territorial marriage document, had been persuaded to stay for the festivities, though he maintained a somewhat shell-shocked expression throughout. And as the sun began to set, the promised rain arrived. Not a destructive deluge, but a gentle, soaking shower that brought relief after weeks of dry heat. The Lakota greeted it with upraised arms and joyful cries, many turning to Wanblee with expressions of validation and awe. Night fell, and with it came a new anxiety for Samuel. By both Lakota and white customs, a newly wedded couple would be expected to retire together. Yet this was no ordinary marriage, and he had no idea what Wanblee's expectations might be. The question was answered when Grey Wolf approached as the celebration began to wind down. "We have prepared the marriage tipi," he informed Samuel, gesturing to an elaborately decorated dwelling that had been erected near the main house. "It is our custom that the new couple spend 7 days together, learning each other's ways." Samuel glanced at Wanblee, who stood nearby, her expression unreadable in the firelight. She met his gaze steadily, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Taking a deep breath, Samuel turned back to Grey Wolf. "We will honor the custom," he said formally. The chief seemed pleased with this response. "Good. In 7 days we will return to complete the treaty between our peoples." With that pronouncement, the final phase of the wedding ceremony began. Wanblee was led away by a group of Lakota women, relatives and tribal elders, Samuel guessed, while he found himself surrounded by his own ranch hands and several Lakota warriors. Jacob pressed a bottle of whiskey into his hands with a wry smile. "Figured you might need this tonight." Boss," he murmured. Samuel accepted it gratefully, though he had no intention of overindulging. This night would be complicated enough with a clear head. An hour later, having endured good-natured ribbing from his men and solemn advice from the Lakota elders, mostly incomprehensible without translation, Samuel approached the marriage tipi. The decorated buffalo hide entrance flap was closed, indicating Wanbli had already entered. Taking a deep breath, Samuel ducked inside, unsure what awaited him in this new chapter of his unexpected life. The interior of the teepee was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. A central fire pit held glowing coals that provided both warmth and soft illumination. The ground was covered with soft buffalo robes and woven reed mats. Bundles of sweet-smelling herbs hung from the lodge poles, and various painted symbols adorned the inner walls. Protection symbols, Samuel guessed, though their specific meanings eluded him. Wanbli sat on the far side of the fire, her ceremonial dress replaced by a simpler garment of soft deerskin. She had removed the paint from her face and unbound her hair, which now fell like a black waterfall over her shoulders. Without the formal regalia, she looked younger, more vulnerable somehow, despite her impressive stature. She watched him enter with those direct eyes that never seemed to waver or look away, a trait Samuel was coming to appreciate, as it made reading her intentions easier than with many people he'd known. "I wasn't sure what to expect," Samuel said softly, remaining near the entrance, giving her space. "This is all very strange to me." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "To me as well," she admitted. "I never thought to be married at all, much less to a white rancher." The frankness of her statement surprised a chuckle from Samuel. "And I never thought to take a Lakota princess for a wife. Life has strange turns." He gestured to the space between them. "May I sit?" She nodded, and Samuel settled himself on a buffalo robe across the fire from her. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other in silence. Two strangers, bound together by circumstance and the expectations of their peoples. The soft crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the continuing celebration outside filled the quiet space between them. "I want you to know," Samuel said finally, choosing his words with care, "that I won't expect anything from you that you're not willing to give. This marriage may have been forced upon us both, but that doesn't mean—" He trailed off, uncomfortable with giving voice to the delicate subject of marital relations. Wanbli's expression softened slightly. "You are honorable, Samuel Blackwood. My uncle said you might be, but I needed to see for myself." She adjusted her position, tucking her legs beneath her with natural grace. "Among my people, a marriage is not considered complete until the couple has spent the first 7 nights together in the same dwelling. But there are no other requirements." The relief Samuel felt was tempered by an unexpected twinge of disappointment, which he quickly dismissed as inappropriate under the circumstances. This was a political union, nothing more. "Then we'll observe the 7 nights, he agreed, "and use the time to learn about each other. If we're to make this work, to bring peace between our peoples, we should at least become friends." Wanbli considered this, then nodded slowly. "Friends," she repeated, as if testing the concept. "Yes, that would be good." She reached beside her and produced a small pouch, from which she extracted what appeared to be dried berries. "Would you share the marriage meal with me? It is a tradition." Samuel accepted the offered berries, finding them surprisingly sweet with a tart aftertaste. "What are these?" he asked. "Choke cherries," she replied. "They grow in the river valleys. My mother gathered these last season." The mention of her mother prompted Samuel to realize how little he knew about his new wife's family beyond her connection to Grey Wolf. "Tell me about your family," he suggested, settling more comfortably on the buffalo robe. "Your parents." A shadow crossed Wanbli's face. "My father was killed by Crow warriors when I was very young. My mother died of the white man-spotted sickness 3 winters ago." The matter-of-fact way she related these tragedies spoke volumes about life on the frontier. Death was a constant companion for both their peoples. "I'm sorry," Samuel said sincerely. "I lost my parents too, father to pneumonia, mother to heart failure, and my fiancée, back before the war, to typhoid." Wanbley's expression registered surprise. "You were to marry before?" Samuel nodded, memories of Elizabeth's face surfacing briefly before he pushed them away. "A lifetime ago, it seems now, in Pennsylvania before I came west." "And you never found another?" Wanbley asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Samuel shrugged. "Out here? There aren't many unmarried women of suitable age, and those few are quickly claimed by younger men with better prospects. I had my ranch to build. Eventually I stopped looking." He didn't add that Elizabeth's death had left him wary of forming such attachments again. The pain of loss had been too great. Instead, he turned the question back to her. "And you? Was there ever someone you might have married among your people?" Wanbley's lips curved in a wry smile. "As I told you before, Lakota men find me unsettling, too tall, too strange. The old ones say I was touched by spirits at birth. Men do not seek spirit-touched women for wives, they fear them." There was old pain in her voice, carefully controlled but detectable nonetheless. They continued talking as the night deepened, exchanging stories of their respective childhoods, describing customs and traditions from their different worlds. Samuel found himself increasingly drawn in by Wanbley's intelligence and quiet dignity. She had a subtle wit that emerged gradually as she became more comfortable, and her observations about both white and Lakota cultures revealed a thoughtful mind that had spent much time watching from the outside. For her part, Wanbley seemed surprised by Samuel's genuine interest in her people's ways and his respectful questions about traditions he didn't understand. As the fire burned low and the sounds of celebration outside finally faded into the quiet of deep night, they had established a tentative foundation of mutual respect, perhaps even the beginnings of the friendship Samuel had proposed. When exhaustion finally overtook them, they arranged the sleeping furs on opposite sides of the dying fire. "Good night, Wanbley," Samuel said as he settled onto his makeshift bed. "Sleep well." In the dim glow of the embers, he saw her nod. "Good night, husband," she replied, testing the word carefully. As Samuel drifted toward sleep, he reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. 3 days ago, he had been a solitary rancher with a predictable future. Now he was married to a Lakota woman considered sacred by her people, with hundreds of tribal members camped on his property and the promise of a formal treaty to come. The situation was bizarre beyond imagination, yet somehow, as sleep claimed him, Samuel felt an unexpected sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The weathered rancher and his giant princess, bound by circumstance but choosing, despite everything, to make the best of their unlikely union. Dawn broke with a clarity that only comes after rain, the sun illuminating dewdrops that transformed the prairie into a sea of diamonds. Samuel awoke to find the teepee already empty, Wanbley having risen before him. Stepping outside, he discovered a transformed landscape, not just from the cleansing rain, but from the continued presence of the Lakota encampment. Hundreds of teepees dotted the hills surrounding his ranch house, smoke from morning fires rising in thin columns against the blue sky. Children ran, playing between the dwellings, women worked at cooking fires or tanning hides, and warriors tended to horses or sat in groups, smoking and talking. It was as if a small city had sprung up overnight around his property. For a moment, Samuel felt a twinge of alarm. This was far more than the brief, ceremonial gathering he had anticipated. Then he spotted Wanbley emerging from the main ranch house, carrying a basket and deep in conversation with Jacob. As Samuel approached, he noted with interest that Jacob was treating Wanbley with the same respectful deference he showed to Samuel himself, not the wary distance he typically maintained with native visitors. "Good morning," Samuel greeted them both. Wanbley turned, a slight smile touching her lips. "Husband," she acknowledged with a nod. Your foreman has been showing me your home. It is different from our dwellings." Jacob cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackwood was asking about our food storage methods. Boss, I showed her the root cellar and smokehouse." The use of Mrs. Blackwood startled Samuel momentarily, though it was, of course, technically correct. He wondered how Wanbley felt about acquiring his surname, but her expression revealed nothing unusual. "I've explained to our guests about ranch boundaries," Jacob continued, a hint of tension in his voice. Some of the younger men were eyeing the north pasture for their horses. "I will speak with my uncle," Wanbley interjected smoothly. "He will ensure your grazing lands are respected." She handed the basket she carried to Samuel. "I have brought morning meal. It is a wife's duty on the first day." Inside the basket, Samuel discovered fresh bannock bread and dried meat, along with some kind of berry preserve. The simple gesture touched him unexpectedly. "Thank you," he said with genuine appreciation. Jacob, sensing the moment had turned personal, mumbled something about checking the herd, and made himself scarce. When he had gone, Samuel turned back to Wanbley. "I hadn't expected so many of your people to remain," he admitted, gesturing toward the extensive encampment. "Is this customary after a wedding?" Wanbley's expression grew serious. "This is not ordinary. They stay because of what White Feather has told them, that our union will bring prosperity and prevent suffering." Samuel frowned slightly. "And if it doesn't? If the drought comes despite our marriage?" It was a question that had troubled him throughout the night. Wanbley's gaze was steady. "Then White Feather's power will be questioned, but the treaty between our peoples will stand. I have my uncle's word on this." She hesitated, then added, "You should know that many have traveled far to see the giant princess wed to the white rancher. There are stories already spreading among the bands." Samuel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I suppose we've become something of a spectacle." The corner of Wanbley's mouth quirked upward. "It was always thus for me," she said with surprising lightness. "At least now the stairs hold reverence instead of mockery." The simple statement revealed more about her past experiences than any lengthy explanation could have. Over the next 7 days, an extraordinary transformation took place at the Blackwood Ranch. What had begun as an arranged marriage of necessity evolved into a unique cultural exchange. The Lakota remained camped on the surrounding hills, but rather than the tense standoff Samuel had feared, a cautious cooperation emerged. Warriors skilled in hunting brought fresh game to supplement the communal meals. Lakota women demonstrated their techniques for preserving meat and berries, while Samuel's ranch hands shared methods for working with cattle and repairing fences. Each night, Samuel and Wanbley retired to the marriage teepee, where their conversations grew increasingly personal and comfortable. They shared stories of their respective pasts, discussed the complex history between their peoples, and gradually pieced together a vision of how their unusual union might serve as a bridge rather than a division. On the third day, a summer thunderstorm swept across the prairie with spectacular force. Lightning split the sky while rain fell in blinding sheets. The Lakota greeted the deluge with celebration rather than dismay, many dancing in the downpour while calling thanks to the sky spirits. White Feather made a point of approaching Samuel as they both watched from the shelter of the ranch house porch. "You see," the old medicine man said through Grey Wolf's translation, "the vision was true. The rain comes because of your union with the Sky Princess." Samuel, not wishing to dispute the claim but maintaining his private skepticism, merely nodded respectfully. Later, when he recounted the interaction to Wanbley, she surprised him with her pragmatic view. "Perhaps it is true, perhaps not," she said with a shrug. "Does it matter? If both our peoples benefit from believing it?" By the 5th day, Samuel noticed a change in how the ranch hands and Lakota warriors interacted. The initial wariness had given way to cautious curiosity, and in some cases, genuine exchange. He observed Morgan, his most outspoken hand, demonstrating rope techniques to a group of young Lakota men, while receiving instruction in return on fashioning more effective bowstrings. Jacob reported that the cattle seemed unusually calm despite the large encampment nearby, and the promised rain had indeed refreshed the pastures that had been beginning to brown under the summer sun. "It's the damnedest thing, Mr. Blackwood," the foreman admitted privately. "I was sure this was going to end in disaster, but—" He gestured toward where Lakota children were being given rides on gentle ranch horses under the supervision of both white and native adults. "Never seen anything like it." Meanwhile, Samuel's relationship with Wanblee continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Her initial reserve gradually softened, revealing a thoughtful woman with strong opinions and a quiet sense of humor. She proved remarkably adaptable, observing the workings of the ranch with keen interest and offering insights from her own cultural perspective that sometimes provided novel solutions to ongoing challenges. Samuel, for his part, found himself increasingly drawn to her unique combination of strength and grace. Her unusual height, which had initially seemed so foreign, now struck him as regal, fitting for a woman called Princess by her people. On the sixth night, as they sat talking in the teepee long after they should have been asleep, Samuel realized with a start that he was no longer thinking of their arrangement as merely political. Wanblee had become important to him as a person, as a partner. The morning of the seventh day dawned clear and bright. According to Lakota tradition, this would mark the completion of their marriage ceremony, and Grey Wolf had indicated it would be the day to formalize the treaty between their peoples. Samuel dressed with particular care, donning his best suit despite the summer heat. When he emerged from the teepee, he found Wanblee already waiting, dressed once again in her ceremonial attire, her hair elaborately braided with feathers and beads. "You look," Samuel began, then faltered, unused to offering such personal observations. "Appropriate for the occasion," he finished awkwardly. A ghost of a smile touched Wanblee's lips. "As do you, husband," she replied, her dark eyes holding his for a moment longer than necessary. Samuel found himself wondering what she was thinking, whether she, too, had begun to see their arrangement as something more than political necessity. Before he could pursue this line of thought, Grey Wolf approached, accompanied by Whitefeather and several tribal elders. "It is time," the chief announced. "We will make the treaty that will bind our peoples as your marriage has bound our families." The formal treaty signing took place before the assembled Lakota and ranch personnel. Judge Wilson, who had returned from Deadwood for the occasion, brought territorial officials to witness the proceedings. The document, carefully crafted over the previous days with input from both sides, established clear boundaries for grazing and hunting rights, protocols for water access during dry seasons, and mutual defense agreements against hostile outside parties. As Samuel and Grey Wolf each made their mark on the treaty, a great cheer rose from the assembled Lakota. Whitefeather stepped forward, raising his arms to the sky. "The vision is fulfilled," he proclaimed. "The drought is defeated. The princess has brought harmony between our peoples." As if to punctuate his words, a sudden breeze swept across the prairie, carrying with it the sweet scent of rain-washed grass and wildflowers. Samuel glanced at Wanblee, standing tall and proud beside him. Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them, an acknowledgement that whatever had brought them together, they had chosen to make something meaningful of it. Later that day, as the Lakota began the process of breaking camp and returning to their traditional territories, Grey Wolf approached Samuel and Wanblee as they stood together on the porch of the ranch house. "You have honored our ways," the chief said to Samuel. "Now you will live as husband and wife in your fashion." He turned to Wanblee, speaking to her briefly in Lakota. She nodded, her expression solemn but composed. "What did he say?" Samuel asked, when Grey Wolf had moved away to oversee the departure preparations. Wanblee turned to face him directly. "He said that I am now of both worlds, Lakota and white, that I should learn your ways while honoring my own." She hesitated, then added, He also said that any children we might have would be considered sacred by our people, bridges between worlds. Samuel felt his face warm slightly at the frank reference to potential offspring. It was a natural assumption in any marriage, of course, but their unique situation had left such considerations unaddressed until now. "And how do you feel about that possibility?" he asked carefully. Wanbley considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I have always walked between worlds," she said finally. "Perhaps that is why the spirits chose me for this path. Children of mixed blood have difficult lives, but also unique gifts. By sunset, the vast majority of the Lakota had departed, leaving the Blackwood Ranch strangely quiet after a week of unprecedented activity. A small contingent remained, Grey Wolf and his immediate family, who would stay one more night before heading back to their own territories. Samuel and Wanbley stood together watching the last of the teepees being dismantled on the distant hillside. "Will you miss them?" Samuel asked. Wanbley nodded slowly. "They are my people," she said simply. "But," she turned to look at the ranch house behind them, "this is my home now." The statement carried weight beyond its simple words, an acceptance of her new life, perhaps even a commitment to it. Samuel felt a surge of protectiveness and something deeper that he wasn't quite ready to name. Whatever the future held, he would ensure she never regretted her choice. That evening, they moved Wanbley's few possessions into the ranch house. The transition from the marriage teepee to the permanent dwelling represented the final step in their unusual courtship, the beginning of their life together in earnest. As darkness fell, they sat together on the porch, watching fireflies rise from the prairie grass like earthbound stars. "Your people called you Princess of the Sky People," Samuel remarked, recalling the reverent way the Lakota had addressed her throughout the celebrations. "What does that mean exactly?" Wanbley was silent for a long moment, her profile noble against the darkening sky. "When I was born," she said finally, "a shower of stars fell from the sky, hundreds of them lighting the night like day. The Old One said it was an omen, that I was marked by the Sky People, the ancestors who watch from above." She gestured toward her unusual height. "When I grew taller than any woman in memory, it seemed to confirm their belief." "And do you believe it?" Samuel asked gently. Wanbley turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "I believe we are all part of something larger than ourselves," she replied. "Whether we call it God or the spirits or the Sky People matters less than how we live. My height made me different, an outsider among my own people. Perhaps that prepared me for this life, to be a bridge between worlds." She reached out tentatively and placed her hand over his, where it rested on the porch railing. The simple gesture, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them, sent a warmth through Samuel that had nothing to do with the summer evening. "I did not choose this marriage," she continued softly, "but I choose now to make it real." Her direct gaze held his, unwavering and clear. "If you also choose this." Samuel looked at their hands together on the railing, hers long-fingered and elegant despite the calluses of a life lived close to the land, his weathered and work-roughened, different yet somehow fitting together. "I choose this," he said simply, turning his hand to clasp hers properly. The commitment in those 3 words went far beyond the political arrangement that had brought them together, or the legal ceremony that had bound them. This was a choice made freely between 2 people who had found unexpected common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the same stars that had heralded Wanbley's birth, Samuel Blackwood and his princess from the Sky People stepped together into their shared future, bridging worlds that had long been divided and finding in each other something neither had dared to seek, a second chance at happiness. 1 year later, the Blackwood Ranch had transformed in ways Samuel could never have imagined. The treaty with Grey Wolf's people had held firm, bringing unprecedented peace to this corner of the Dakota Territory. Word of the unusual arrangement had spread throughout the region, drawing curious visitors from as far as Cheyenne and Bismarck. Some came with skepticism or even hostility, but most departed with newfound respect for what Samuel and Wanblee had accomplished. The ranch itself had prospered. The promised rains had indeed materialized, bringing lush growth to the pastures and strong calves to the expanding herd. But the most profound changes were more personal in nature. Samuel stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Wanblee moved among the gardens she had established, combining traditional Lakota plantings with vegetables suited to the prairie soil. Her belly was swollen with their first child, due to arrive with the autumn harvest. When she sensed his gaze, she looked up, a smile transforming her strong features. In that moment, bathed in the golden light of a Dakota sunset, she appeared to Samuel exactly as her people had named her, a princess, touched by the sky. As if acknowledging his thoughts, a single shooting star traced a brilliant path across the darkening heavens. A silent reminder of the strange and wonderful circumstances that had brought them together. "The Sky People are watching," Wanblee called to him, her voice carrying easily across the yard. Samuel nodded, no longer skeptical of such notions. After all, who was he to question the mysteries of the universe when his own life had taken such an improbable turn? He descended the porch steps and crossed to where she stood, placing a gentle hand on her rounded belly where their future grew. "Let them watch," he replied softly. "They'll see that some threats are blessings in disguise." If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.